Good evening and welcome. In this video podcast, we're going to discuss the differences between formal context and informal or natural context. But before we can do that, we have to explore different processes that take place during language learning. We understand context as where the language process takes place. The first factor we're going to talk about is input. Input is a key factor in language learning. The features that promote learning are, first of all, quantity. Then there's quality. Input has to be challenging and understandable by the learner in order to be successful. And the third one is frequency. Frequency increases the chance of learners to process new information. The second factor we're going to talk about is intake. Intake is input processed by the learner at a specific point of the learning process. In order to have a successful intake, the learner has to understand the meaning so he can focus his attention in the linguistic part of the message and understand how the different parts of the message work together to convey the meaning. If the input is specifically addressed, or as it also calls personalized, it also helps a lot. Simpler input is also desirable, and of course it will all happen better if it takes place in a friendly learning environment. The third factor we're going to talk about is interaction. Interaction happens when the subject enters or gets in contact with the target language. Interaction allows students to try their newly acquired linguistic knowledge. It also helps them to acquire new functions and features, both linguistical and syntactical. It can promote input, even negative input that can prevent fossilization, and can also allow students to acquire social linguistic features that are part of the communication process. The question is if learners should be only recipients of input or should they also participate. Researchers have established that all students go through this, what is called a silent stage. In this stage, they are only receiving information or input or are not producing anything. After this silent stage, students start producing our next factor that's called output. Output is essential because it promotes noticing. It helps learners notice the gap between what they know and what they need to learn to continue on their learning process. It also helps them test their hypothesis about the language and has a very important metacognitive aspect because it helps them take control and internalize the linguistic knowledge. The last factor we're going to talk about is output. Output happens when the learner has to modify his input in order to be understood. And it helps them try new structures and challenge their interlanguage to the full. So now we can talk about the differences between formal context, the one that happens in the classroom, and informal or natural context. In the informal or natural context, language is used as a means of communication, and the target of the importance part is in meaning. Whereas in the formal context, the one that happens in the classroom, language becomes the object of study and the focus is on the linguistic forms. That's one of the main differences between the two types of context. Researchers have pointed out those two aspects can be merged in the classroom if the language is used in a realistic way. In recent years, classroom research has somehow enabled researchers to talk about what can be considered effective teaching. They have then um, uh, decided there are three stages that can be analyzed. The first one is teacher talk, the second one is interaction analysis, and the third one is discourse analysis. Teacher talk, as it can easily be understood, uh, is general because teachers do not address one student most of the time, they address many. This generalization can sometimes represent some problems because it limits personalized interaction and can represent some problems in understanding and then because of that in learning. Uh, Interaction analysis places teacher and learner as part of the same communicative equation. And uh, discourse analysis happens when the learner has to create new and more complex structures, and it has three stages. First, when teacher starts interaction. Second, when the student responds. And third, when teacher gives feedback. Feedback is a very sensitive and complex feature that can help students re-establish their interlanguage and has a very important motivational dimension. It can be positive, neutral, or even negative, and we have to be very careful with it. Also, task is very important because task determines the language that is received and produced. There are tasks that promote noticing the most, like information gap task, problem solving gaps, and debates. So, now that we have established the main differences between formal context and not informal context, I consider that more research has to be carried out in order to use those differences in a positive way to enhance learning and language acquisition. Okay, thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Bye.